the only things in front of me are my 2 documents, my outline, and my Chromebook is open with my stopwatch ready. Okay. The global issue I chose is identity, culture, and community. More specifically, I'll be talking about the lack of or delayed individual growth that is caused by living in a strict traditional society. The 2 works I chose are The Chronicle of a Death Foretold, written by Gabriel Marquez Garcia, and The Awakening, written by Kate Chopin. In The Chronicle of a Death Foretold, it follows Santiago Nassar and the events leading to his murder. But for this speech, I'll be focusing more on Angela Vicario, who was supposed to marry Bayardo San Roman, but it was discovered on their wedding night that she was no longer a virgin, and she blamed Santiago Nassar for this, and this ended in his death. And for The Awakening, the book follows the character Edna Pontellier, set in New Orleans in the 1890s. And it's about her journey finding her identity, living in this society where women are only seen as having the role that is being a good wife and being a good mother. Okay, so I will be first talking about The Awakening. So, in this scene, Mr. Pontellier and Miss Pontellier are arguing since Miss Pontellier solely wants to go to sleep and rest, while Mr. Pontellier is telling Edna to get up and check on her son, who is supposedly sick. So, in this section I chose, which is pretty early on in the book, it's on page 7 to 8. Lines 2 to 3, it says, "If it was not a mother's role to look after children, whose on earth was it?" And Gabriel Marquez Garcia uses sarcastic diction here, as it was a very common belief that it was the woman's sole purpose to be a good mother and wife, which is extremely problematic, as women should be able to have their own identities outside of just being caretakers. So it really shows that women weren't encouraged or even given the opportunity to just think about having their own hobbies, interests, or any of it. So it really showed that they couldn't grow as individuals in the society that only sees them as being caretakers. And later on, Miss Pontellier and Miss Pontellier are just like going back and forth. However, they're not talking. From line 7 to 11, it shows that Miss Pontellier is going in the room and out the room, and she's sitting down, but they're not talking, and Mr. Pontellier is smoking, and he's asking her these questions, but he just ends up falling asleep, and she ends up going outside. So this also sort of criticizes that in this society, marriage was solely for money and for status and not love. So it's already embedded in their society to just focus on what everybody else thinks of them as a society, like their status and so forth. So obviously there's not room for them to grow as individuals. And later on, from lines 18 to 23, there's vivid imagery. It shows that, or it says, the tears came so fast to Miss Pontellier's eyes that the damp sleeve of her baignoire, which is French for bathrobe, no longer such dry them. She was holding the back of her chair with one hand. Her loose sleeve had slipped almost to the shoulder of her uplifted arm. Turning, she thrust her face, steaming and wet, into the bend of her arm, and she went on crying there, not caring any longer to dry her face, her eyes, her arms. So, very obviously and very vividly, she is upset. However, it's also important to note that she's not voicing any of her thoughts to Mr. Pontellier. She's just sort of stuck there, just like crying about her situation. She's not doing anything. She's not initiating, like starting to show that she wants to grow as an individual herself. She's just sort of crying about the situation she's in. She's not growing. And also later in the novel, when they come back from their summer vacation, they're back in New Orleans, and Mr. Pontellier and Miss Pontellier are having dinner, and Mr. Pontellier decides to leave and have his dinner at the club since he's complaining about many things, including the food. and Miss Montelier just wants to sort of enjoy her dinner. And there she starts to realize like this depth of her happiness and how she does want to do something, but she ends up just taking out her wedding ring and just repeatedly hitting it, obviously not causing any significant damage to the ring, but she grabs the vase and she throws it until it breaks. And I think this is really important since it shows that she does wanna do something to grow and to have her own identity and to just leave this society. But a part of her is like scared to vocalize these thoughts since she will be cast out of society for being this woman that divorces her husband, leaves her children and all that, and she'll receive lots of backlash for that. And my second text is The Chronicle of a Death Foretold, written by Gabriel Marquez Garcia Marquez, but translated by Gregory Rabassa. Um, so in this scene, the narrator is going back to Ancala Vicario to talk directly to her to figure out what happened with Santiago Nazar. But this is 23 years in the future, so she's not the same person she was before. And the positioning of this section that I chose, which I think is page 89 in the book, is interesting since it's Ancala Vicario on the top and her mother, Placida Vicario, on the bottom. And it just shows that they've taken very opposite directions in life. It's a juxtaposition. In line 6, it says that after a few minutes, she, as in Ankala, no longer seemed as aged to me as at first sight, but almost as young in my memory, and she had nothing in common with the person she'd been obliged to marry. Later on line 10, it said her mother in her grouchy old age was seeing me like a difficult ghost. So they're very opposite sort of descriptions are very interesting since it shows that the environment in which you like surround yourself in really does affect how you grow as a person. Ankala moved away from her home, which is why she's much more different than she is now versus Placida stayed in her society that she's been raised in. She knows well. However, she's miserable in that she's doesn't want to talk about the situation at all. I do find it incredibly interesting how Ankela's growth was very exaggerated and it wanted to be, and I think Marquez Garcia did this on purpose to show just how healthy growth can be when in the right environment. It said that Ankela was so mature and witty that it was difficult to believe she was the same person. And like I stated before, she was nothing in common with the person that the narrator once knew. Shows that the environment, when given the chance, a person's growth can really accelerate in a way than in living in this strict traditional society where everyone follows the same standards and can't express who they want to be. I find it also very interesting how their sort of reactions to being told to recount these events are. It was stated that Placida had gone beyond what was possible to make Ancala Vicario die in life, but her daughter herself had brought her plans to naught because she never made any mystery out of her misfortune. On the contrary, she would recount it in all its details to anyone who wanted to hear it. Obviously, Ancala has grown up and she's found who she is, which has made her more comfortable to discuss the mistakes that she's made. While Placida is stuck where she's always been and where she always will be, and she somehow doesn't want to move on from what happened, and she'd rather just cut off her daughter and never talk about her again. Earlier in the text, however, Placida, when it was discussed how perfect her daughters were for marriage, she said that she had raised them to suffer, which gives an idea as to what her type of her idea of raising her daughters and how she wanted them to be conveyed and portrayed in society. So